erase what we have here, and guess what? I'm going to be a great artist, and I'm going to draw you a fat cell. And again, this is going to be in your book, so you don't have to draw it for yourself. I took the fun out of that. How you could have been doing, see that? You could have got the crayons out and started coloring. But you have this in your book, and yours looks a little better than the one I'm going to put in the board. But let me draw you a fat cell, okay? Get real fancy here and draw you a fat cell. Okay, drawing the fat cell. There we go. Here's the mitochondria. That's important to the fat cell because that's the fat cell's furnace. And here's some water because all cells in the body have water present to help with cellular activity. And of course, we said this is a fat cell, right? So there's the fat in the fat cell. And what happens is this. When there's an energy need, okay, the body says, I need energy. And that's signaled by what? We said the heart. The heart signals, hey, I need energy. So what happens is that it signals the body to transport fat from one part of the cell into the other part of the cell, the mitochondria, which is the furnace part of the cell, and then fat is burned. And that's where we produce heat. Heat is produced, and basically that is aided by the spark of the thyroid, okay? That's where those come in. So when the pancreas, when we have level blood sugar and our body's capable of using excess fat as a source of energy, our heart signals, hey, we need some energy. Fat is transported into the mitochondria, and then the thyroid heats up, and that's how the fat is burned, and it produces heat. Okay, so now we're using fat as an energy source, and that's how it happens. Let me explain to you some difficulties here, though, okay? So I said, one of the things I said, the water here, this particular fat cell, first of all, it's very magnified because we have trillions of fat cells in our body, and this one's really magnified because if they were this size, none of us would fit in really a room. Even the room that I'm in right now, I wouldn't fit in it if our fat cells were this big. So I've magnified it very large. But this particular fat cell is something interesting about it, in that this fat cell has so much fat in it. It's so engorged. I'm going to use that word because it sounds terrible, right? It's so engorged with fat. Makes you want to lose it, right? So engorged with fat that there's not enough room for all the water to be present inside the cell. So what happens is some of this water actually expands the fat cell and gets trapped under the subcutaneous layers and trickles under the subcutaneous layers of the skin and pulls that fat cell out and starts dimpling your skin. Some of you refer that as cottage cheese. Now you know why one of the reasons why I don't like cottage cheese, okay? I just don't like the connotation that it brings me to mind. But some people refer that as, but really what that is that cellulite that's trapped under there is water that's trapped under layers of the skin because there's too much fat and the water that can be contained in the cell. Now the good news is this. When you start losing actual fat, a lot of times you will notice that your skin becomes smoother. You notice even in the thighs is a good example of this, ladies. You might notice the front of your thighs actually begin now to become smoother. You don't have that dimpling to the thighs any longer. And that's because what's happening is you're losing the fat, and now the water can stay within the cell. Now, if you've had fat there for a very long time, when you go through this process, you may find that your skin never really, it still doesn't have the firmness or the nice surface to it that you like. Well, there's treatments nowadays that can help you get some of that water that's trapped, because that's water that's just trapped under layers and layers of skin there from the fat that was there before, okay? So you may need to use some of those other methods, and they work really well as long as you lost the fat. If you do some of those methods and you still have all the body fat, you are just going to lose water. You know, some of those body wrap methods where you go in and you wrap your body up and then you lose a whole bunch of water. Well, that water's just going to come back again, and you're not really going to really change the body or affect the body. It might be a quick fix for an event that you have coming up, but it's not going to really help change the appearance of your skin. So that's what's happening here with this fat cell. Now, what I said to you, what has to happen is fat has to travel from one part of the cell into the mitochondria where it's going to be burned, okay? Well, there's a problem with nowadays. Nowadays, what happens is we find, now, if this was an architectural drawing, most of you know this is a door. And think of it as a door, because the problem is nowadays, a lot of times, our door is shut. So although the body says, hey, I need energy, There's no way that fat can transport to the mitochondria because it doesn't have the necessary things that are possible to keep that door open. Because again, problems with our food supply. In the past, in our food supply, one of the things that we used to get from grass-fed cattle and from our dairy supply was something called carnitine, which is not really an amino acid, although it's called L-Carnitine. But it's a particular substance that was naturally found in grass-fed cattle in our dairy supply that we no longer get in abundance. And again, one of the reasons why I see more childhood obesity is because we don't have the ability to transport fat any longer because we're not getting the things in our body, and our body doesn't have the raw materials to make these things to cause this to happen. So our door has been closed. Well, you can fix that with something like L-Carnitine. Again, it was used in the 80s, and we saw big signs. You could walk into a place like GNC, and they'd have a big sign over top of L-Carnitine, and then it came in glass bottles, by the way, back in the 80s. And a big sign of it with fat loss. And after a couple of months, the sign was gone, and L-Carnitine was put on the shelf somewhere else. Because people would, drink the whole bottle, get on the scale, and say, hey, this doesn't work. I weigh the same thing. That's because they didn't understand how to use L-Carnitine. L-Carnitine is used best, and it's most effective when it's used first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. So if you are an AM exerciser, pay attention to me. If you're someone that gets up in the morning and exercises first thing in the morning, use L-Carnitine, because what it will do is open up the door. It will help transport fat into the mitochondria. And one of the things that L-Carnitine does too is it really gives you this anti-fatigue factor. You'll almost feel like you could keep on going. You don't really fatigue from exercise. And that's a good thing because that's a sign that your body actually is using fat as an energy source. You'll know because you'll feel like you have a lot more energy. That's a body that's tuned a lot better and can transport. So that's important. Transporting. That's the first thing we look at when we want to use excess fat. Can your body transport? And I would say if you're a morning exerciser, make sure you can use that L-Carnitine. Why not? Because that's going to ensure that you can transport, especially if you're trying to lose fat. And you've been exercising, and you've been doing it in the morning all this time, and you're still beating your head against the wall. One of the ways to be efficient, add that L-Carnitine, okay? Because it's going to make sure the door's open. Now, there's another issue. The great thing is the door's open, and that's wonderful. But the problem is some of the fat over here, let me use another color. Some of this fat over here, guess what? It's big fat. The fat's so big and thick, okay, because it's been there so long. Ladies, butt, hip, and thighs. That's an area where the fat becomes thicker, where it's so dense that you can't even pull out and do a body fat test in those areas because it's so dense and thick. So the fat's so big over here, yes, guess what? It doesn't fit through the door. You figured that out? Right. That's where fat emulsifiers come into place. Now, a fat emulsifier scientifically is called a lipotropic. Okay, a lipotropic. What that means is a fat emulsifier. It breaks fat into smaller pieces. Okay, all lipotropics do that. And you can go into your local GNC or your local store and ask them. They may, again, if they're not informed about supplements, they may not know what a lipotropic is. But a lipotropic breaks the fat into smaller pieces, okay? It breaks it down so now it can fit through there. Let me give you an analogy to this. Everybody's heard of Dawn Liquid. Dawn Liquid is a grease emulsifier. They actually have a patent on their liquid soap because what it does is it emulsifies grease. Now, what's interesting about grease is if you were to look at grease, and I'll give you a little science lesson here. If you were to look at grease under a microscope, it has a huge molecular structure, big molecules. And that's the reason why grease sticks to stuff. The molecules are so big, they stick. Well, now you pour Dawn liquid on it, and what Dawn does, it takes those big molecules and literally changes it and breaks them down and makes them into small little beads. It beads it up, it emulsifies it. It cuts the grease by breaking down those molecules, and now that grease rinses right away. It's really how a lipotropic works in the body. It breaks the fat into little smaller pieces, so now it can transport. And that's important, especially when you put that with your L-Carnitine. You put the Lipotropic Plus and the L-Carnitine together, and man, bam, you got a way to open the door and transport the fat, and you got it emulsified, broken down. Okay, so the first thing to be efficient at fat loss, you got to be a transporter, and then you've got to be able to emulsify and make sure fat gets into that mitochondria.